My wife will tell you that I'm a very conservative man. I'm a notorious creature of habit. But about 13 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. Let me tell you all about it and what led up to that. My name is Devin Masters. I'm currently 41 years old. My wife Beth and I have no children, so it's just the two of us. To start from the beginning, I grew up in a quiet little area in East Tennessee. Life was hard for us growing up. Our father worked long hours at a nuclear production facility as a waste disposal driver. When he would come home, he would drink fairly heavy and would not be the nicest person, as you can imagine. My mother was a short woman who was rather defenseless, so eventually she left him after he became abusive. That led to me having trust issues. It was further worsened by an event with my mother's boyfriend that almost destroyed my childhood. Without getting into much detail, he had bought her a green scarf and told me he wanted my help to go wrap it up in the basement so it would be a surprise for her. You can imagine the events that transpired. Needless to say, I felt confused as to who I could trust, if anyone could love me, or if I could ever be somebody. I developed an imaginary friend who became the only stable thing in my life. We played together, talked to each other, and had epic adventures. All in my head, of course. With everything that happened to me, and choosing to escape in my imagination to deal with it, I became quite detached and slowly slipped out of touch. I became depressed and suicidal, and the only relief I had was to slip into my fantasy world I had created. Thankfully, my oldest sister figured out what was happening and convinced my mom to take me to a doctor. After several months of therapy sessions and some medication, I was able to work through my problems, get my mom's boyfriend arrested, and reconnect with my estranged father. I'm in my mid-teens by this point. I developed routines that I never broke away from, and that helped me to keep my mind organized. I felt like I had beaten mental illness and was stronger than ever. That's when I met the most beautiful 10th grader I had ever seen. She later became my wife. After we graduated from college, I had great difficulty finding a job, as I just couldn't seem to fit in. I was still somewhat socially awkward and had moments of wanting to detach again, but I was able to manage easily. So to make ends meet and to provide for my now pregnant new wife, I took a job as an over-the-road truck driver. It was not glamorous by any means, but it paid the bills. We were so excited at the opportunity to be parents. My wife already had names picked out. Raquel if it was a girl, and Finley if it was a boy. I was just fine with it. A few months had passed, and life was settling into the sense of normalcy and new routines. One day, while I was just outside of Michigan headed back home from an overnight load, I got a phone call that changed my life. My wife called crying because she was bleeding and her abdomen was cramping. She was so terrified because she was 4 months pregnant. I pulled my rig over and got her to calm down. Shoot, I had to calm myself down. I put her on hold and called her sister, and she rushed over and took her to the ER. I got back on the road and drove with the fury of a dozen chariots to get back to my wife. Before I got into Tennessee, my sister-in-law called me with gut-wrenching news. We lost the baby. I didn't believe what I heard. It didn't register in my brain. She was perfectly fine when I left, so this is not possible, I thought to myself. This news hit me like a ton of bricks. Once I got home, I took a few weeks off to be with my wife as we mourned our loss and picked ourselves up from this horrible blow. A couple of months passed and I was back to my daily grind. My wife was rebounding as much as could be expected and was starting to have a positive outlook on our future and life. I, on the other hand, found myself having a much harder time. I felt like I didn't want to fight to keep my sanity, but at the same time, I didn't want to fall off a cliff back into the terrible state I was several years ago. I just kept pushing through. My wife must have noticed because she brought it up one morning. She said I was becoming distant and less talkative, and it was like I was bottling things up. She suggested that I talk to someone. Immediately, I snapped back at her that I was fine. Nothing was wrong. I was just tired from long work days. Deep inside, I knew it was because I was tired. Not from work, but from fighting my past demons. I didn't want to go back to a doctor to be put on medication. I had overcome those things. I was a fighter. I was strong. I apologized to my wife and started faking being in a good mood, even though I was being eaten away inside. She tried a couple of more times over the next week, but I just ignored her. I felt like I was when I was a broken young boy, regressing into my made-up world. But I refused to get help because I knew I could beat it. A year and a half goes by, and I'm still dealing with the same feelings. I've been driving a truck now for a couple of years, and things are going good. My wife is happy at home, and my boss is happy with my work ethic. I'm pulling a long haul headed to California on Interstate 40. Due to an accident on the interstate, I have to be detoured just as I'm getting through Flagstaff, Arizona. I get off and cut down Highway 89A and make my way to Sedona, Arizona, and circle around all the way to Prescott and make my way back up to the interstate. Now, it's in the middle of the night, and I've only been in this area once. It's a beautiful area, but at night, it's not very stunning. I started zoning out and going through the motions of driving. My mind started to think about all the things I had gone through as a little kid up into my early teens, and the loss of my child started weighing heavy on my mind through every hill and curve of this lonely place. I started to break down. I had a delivery deadline, so I kept going, but I started to lose it. I felt like I was having a mental breakdown. But I'm strong, I told myself. I didn't think I needed any help. I felt anger well inside of me, and then fear wash over me. I became confused, so I briefly closed my eyes and felt my head spin a little bit. But then, suddenly, I was just fine. I stopped feeling anything. All of a sudden, in the distance, I could see flashing hazard lights. The closest service station was a couple of miles in either direction. As I got closer, I could make out a person standing beside the vehicle. It was a woman, and she appeared to be alone. Of course, I locked the doors when I saw the vehicle. I knew all about the horror stories of truckers being attacked and so forth. But this situation felt different. I got about 5 car lengths away, and I could see that she had a phone in her hand, but it wasn't illuminated. She appeared to be cold, stranded out in the middle of nowhere, and helpless. She was shorter and rather thin, with short brown hair and a pale skin. She was even wearing a bright orange shirt and a green scarf. It's not like she could hide very well wearing that. I felt sorry for her. I got up beside her vehicle and rolled the window down partially. I turned off the engine and got over into the passenger seat, called out to her and asked if she was okay. She said her phone died and her car started making crazy noises and died. She looked visibly shook up. I knew I couldn't leave her there. There are animals in the area, and I just knew something would happen to her. She asked if I could give her a ride to the next town. I told her I would. I unlocked the door and she climbs in the cab. We set off for the next town. From where we were, the next town is only about 12 miles away, or about a 20-minute drive. As we are rolling along, she tries to initiate small talk. We pass a sign that says we're only 5 miles from Cottonwood, so I get myself prepared to look around for something open at this time of the night. She asks me my name, and so I tell her. I ask her what her name is, and she said it's Raquel. I asked her where she is from, and she says she's from Tennessee. No way, I thought to myself. I might have gotten a little bit excited about it, but she didn't seem to be fazed by it. I asked her what she was doing out here, but she just kept quiet. I asked if she had family or work out here, but again, she just kept quiet. She then started talking about how humans are to blame, and humans need to pay for the problems they've caused. It really sounded like gibberish. so I just stared ahead and kept driving. I felt like we should have arrived to the town already, but I still couldn't see anything in the distance. The woman then started making strange, throaty noises. I just knew that the one time I pick up a hitchhiker, I get a crazy one. By now, we have for sure gone 5 miles, but still, there is no town. All of a sudden, we passed the same road sign again that said Cottonwood, 5 miles. I was confused as could be. I knew what I saw before, and yet I was seeing it again. I counted it off to my imagination and kept driving. I knew I would eventually get somewhere. After a minute or two, the lady started making noises again. I could see out of the corner of my eye that she was now looking at me, so I glanced over, and what I saw, I was not prepared for. She was staring right at me, and her eyes were solid black. She was grinning on top of it. It completely freaked me out. She started to laugh. Her laugh was high-pitched and ominous. I had no idea what was going on. My truck started rattling, and she flashed a light in my face. She went on yelling about how we're going to end you humans and that they will start a superior race of earthlings. It made no sense to me, and I was horrified by her descriptions of the suffering she was planning. The lady, or whatever she was suddenly normal again. I did a double take and rubbed my eyes, and it was as if nothing happened. It was surreal, and I couldn't understand what I was experiencing. She asked if I was okay, and I said I was. I tried to reach down for my gun, but my arms are frozen to the wheel. I can't move at all. It's like I'm paralyzed. I looked back over at her, and she stuck out her tongue. Instead of a normal human tongue, it was black and forked, and looked like a venomous spider movie character. Suddenly, I could move again. She transformed into a gruesome alien being and started to attack me. I got my gun and fired a shot. But as the bullet came out of the chamber, it was melting into goo. I tried firing more shots, but they all did the same thing. She jumped on top of me and opened her mouth wide, as if to bite my face off, and all that could fill my eyes were bright lights. She let off a scream that sounded like an air horn, and then suddenly vanished. In that instant, I saw myself as a little boy again, scared and confused. My head bounces off the headrest and I come to. It was so strange. I remember it quite vividly. I was in the oncoming lane of traffic, and another semi was barreling headfirst at me. He was flashing his lights and laying on the horn. I swung the steering wheel to the right and whipped back into my lane, but I lost control of the load in the process. I swerved back and forth and went right off the road and flipped sideways. I was awake during the whole ordeal, but passed out just before the rig slid to a halt. I woke up in an emergency room bed with bandages around my head and my right arm in a sling. My left arm was cuffed to the bed. I was so confused. A nurse came to check on me, and I asked her what was going on. She asked what I remembered, and I told her my whole experience. She just kept a straight face and listened to me the whole time. She said she would be back with a doctor, and we would discuss the situation with me. An officer was standing outside the room, but didn't come in. The doctor came to my room and talked to me about what happened for nearly an hour. He told me that he was a psychiatrist and explained what happened based on my medical history he gathered. I had a mental breakdown and started hallucinating. He explained what all of that meant. I asked why I was handcuffed to the bed, and he said that I had stopped my truck in the middle of the road just outside of Sedona, and a state trooper had pulled up behind me. He came up to my passenger door and called out if I was okay. I opened fire on him. I shot at the officer 4 times before starting my rig up and driving away. The officer started chasing me, and I was driving all over the road. I was in the other lane as I ran another semi off the road before I swerved back over and crashed myself. The other semi lost control as well and plowed into a mound, and his rig exploded from the crash. He didn't make it out. The doctor said that the state trooper found no vehicle anywhere near my rig when he saw me stopped in the middle of the lane. There was also no evidence of another person in my cab except a green scarf in the floorboard. I just sat there in the bed in total disbelief. How had I sunk so far that I did these things without even knowing it? That's not me. I would never harm anyone. After I recovered, I was taken back to Tennessee, where I was sentenced to 10 years in a state mental hospital under guard to get myself straightened out. I then had up to 10 years of probation after that, pending my psych evaluation. I've been released from the hospital and am at home. I am currently under only 2 years of probation because of my good recovery. I can never go back and change what happened. I have to live with that. What I regret is not listening when someone who loved me reached out. When my wife saw the signs, she tried to help me, but I decided that I knew better and was too strong to fall. If only I had listened, that trucker would still be alive, and I would not have suffered all these years of fighting alone. The hitchhiker I saw in my head was the sum of my fears and the feelings I just kept bottled in. She was my father when he was drunk and abusive. She was my mother's boyfriend with his twisted desires. She was all my failures and all my missed chances. She was my unborn daughter and the heart-wrenching pain I never dealt with. The first step to gaining true control over your mental health is by recognizing you need help. I finally recognized it when I met that hitchhiker from nowhere. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. My name is Matt. I hope you enjoyed my story. Your generosity and support is much appreciated, so please hit that subscribe button and like my video and share to your social media. I'll catch everyone in the next video.